From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laural Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laural Porter. Decision 2020. While the national picture remains unclear as of this taping on Friday, we do have some clarity in our state and local races. We bring back our election night panel to get their big takeaways from the night and for the year ahead. That's later. But first, Portland City Council newcomer Commissioner Dan Ryan joins me. He was elected in a special election in August to replace the late Nick Fish. And the early days for Ryan have been described as a trial by fire. He's here now to tell us what these days have been like, about the council's vote on the police budget this week, protesters showing up at his house and causing damage, and his thoughts about the new council. Commissioner, welcome back to Straight Talk. And first, let me just say how sorry I am about what happened at your house last night. Tell us about that.
Thank you, Laural. I appreciate that. Well, probably the sad thing is I was expecting it and prepared. And so I was safe, me and my fiance, and a lot of communication with my amazing neighbors on the block. And what happened is people came, a destructive mob, and did destruction on my home. And I got home a couple hours ago, and it's been difficult to look at it. And the good news is the details of the security, the public safety system did remove the people doing the damage. And I'm grateful that they responded so quickly.
Well, we're looking
and
at
that everyone is safe. And I really want to thank my neighbors for how kind they've been throughout the past week.
We're looking at some photos and video of the scene from last night. Mayor Wheeler on Friday morning condemned what happened, saying violence, criminal destruction, and intimidation will not be tolerated. How do you feel about what happened and what this says about the political environment in Portland?
I think it says very little about the big picture of Portland. It says a lot about a small group of people that are taking it upon themselves to ignite more stress during a very, very difficult time in our city with COVID, with a mental health crisis that's coming with that, with economic uncertainty, with the houselessness challenge, and of course with the racial reckoning. They're not on message about anything that's helpful, and we have to call it out. We need common sense to take over and take our city back.
And this isn't the first time it happened, and we'll talk a little bit more about the protests last week. A trial by fire is how your first days on council have been described. What do you think? How would you describe these first days for you?
Well, I would say, first of all, trial by fire is probably an appropriate metaphor, since I was sworn in on the day when the air quality was so bad that we were all locked in for over a week. And so, my heart goes out to those many Oregonians that are still repairing from that horrific damage. And I also know that a lot of Portlanders are experiencing trial by fire ever since COVID hit. I think about the parents that are trying to juggle educating their children now at home, and also handling and trying to manage their jobs. I think about the many elders that have been isolated and don't have their social structures. And so I'm pretty fortunate to be in a position that I think is a really good fit for me to serve the city at a time of multiple crises and also a lot of opportunity to move forward.
Is there anything you want to say to the protesters who came to your house?
I just think they should know that when they come into a neighborhood, a quiet street, with half of the neighbors happen to be elders, half of those elders happen to come from countries that were dealing with war, and they came here to become Americans and make a better life. They don't speak English well, and it's very traumatizing to have people come late at night and invade your privacy and your space. We all need rest and rejuvenation so we can serve our city, our families, our neighbors, and it's just very selfish behavior.
Let's talk about that city council vote this week. The protesters were upset about on cutting the Portland Police Bureau budget by $18 million. You voted against it, as did Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Fritz. That's even though Commissioner Hardesty, who endorsed you in the election, was hoping you'd vote for the cuts. And you had said during the campaign you didn't support the status quo. Help us understand why you voted the way you did.
Yeah, we need to build community safety system that everyone can get behind. And that really is about connecting the dots between all the first responder systems and also the wraparound services that are mostly governed by the county. And that status quo that we need to bust is looking at these things in silos. And so at a time when we have unprecedented crime upticks and people aren't feeling safe, we've already cut 27 million from the police budget this fiscal year, and cutting an additional 18 million at a time of this much stress on the system. And we have a new police chief that we'd like to give a chance to succeed. It was very important to not make such a drastic cut at this time. It just didn't pencil out. It made no sense, and we heard from a lot of people that they didn't want this change at this time.
After the vote, Commissioner Hardesty was really disappointed. She said the vote maintains the status quo and does nothing to make Black lives better. What's your response to that feeling, and what additional police reforms are you willing to push for?
Yeah, I'm looking for reforms at the police. The culture change is what really needs to happen. We have a police state that since the beginning was more of a military response going to battle. And the community wants a police department connected to other first responders that have a guardianship component. They want to do more. We need more community policing. We need to build relationships on the streets. If there's one little micro example of this, is my neighbors are getting to know the police in this area because of these incidents. And it's those relationships that really matter. And we know that Black Lives Matter. We know what this movement is about. And it's about building capital and infrastructure for the long-term success. That's why my entire career has really been focused on, from birth all the way to career, to really see results for African Americans and others in the BIPOC community so that they can build a better life in the city of Portland.
You have been under a lot of pressure. Let's go back to the protesters who came to your house last week. That was before the city council initially heard testimony about defunding the Portland police. What was that like for you, having the protesters show up? You were at home late at night. Describe the situation.
Well, real quick, I was probably more asleep than awake. It was 11:15, and the doorbell just kept ringing. And then we started hearing, "Dan Ryan, we know you're in there. Come out, Dan Ryan." And my fiance and I made a quick decision in this time of crisis, if you will, and we decided that we'd go out and de-escalate the noise. They were playing music loudly, and again, back to my neighbors, I didn't want them to be triggered by all of this noise. And so my fiance, who is fierce, asked for some ground rules so that we could have dialogue, and the cameras turned off, and I ran in to get the mask because I was so stressed. I forgot to grab my COVID compliant mask. So I went back in and grabbed that, and we had dialogue. And in fact, I listened and listened and listened. And there were 3 people in particular that happened to be African American, where the dialogue went on for a little bit longer, and we exchanged numbers, and our office is in touch with them.
It got controversial, especially afterwards. According to OPB and Oregon Live, your fiance had tried to keep reporters from taking any photos or video of the situation. Oregon Live and OPB said you tried to suppress the First Amendment rights of the press. How do you react to that?
Well, I always look at what the results are, and all I know is that First Amendment was alive and well. Everything was recorded. There was plenty of footage, and I have a fierce fiance that was just trying to protect the person they love. And the good news is that we had some dialogue, we suppressed and we de-escalated the situation, and the First Amendment was alive and well.
The Oregonian editorial board wrote about the incident, saying it's an unfortunately common reaction by anyone uncomfortable with scrutiny, whether that's police, protesters, or politicians. We hope that Ryan's insistence on no cameras and the targeting of press was a momentary lapse that won't be repeated as he gets used to life as a Portland public official. Do you think it was a lesson learned going forward?
Well, I think the lesson that I learned is that I now realize that the press is embedded with the protesters. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize that. So many people seem like they're the press with their cameras on, and we're just trying to subdue the noise and the distractions so that we could listen to one another. So now I know that the press is embedded with the protesters.
Let's talk about this new council. The mayor won re-election, and there will be another new face as Mingus Mapps defeated the incumbent Chloe Udaly. Plus, Carmen Rubio takes Amanda Fritz's seat in January when Fritz retires. What is your vision for this new council going forward?
Well, my vision is to always work with whoever the voters elect, and I'm a bridge builder, and it's got to start with the team on the city council. I think we have a great team of 5 that is emerging. I think that we can all get behind collective wisdom on what we need to do about our top 3 priorities. We have to put our egos aside and really do what's best for Portland. It's not going to be my way, the highway. It's never going to be like that for one person. It's complex, it's dynamic, and it's time for us to really just get on the same page, have a vision about what success looks like, and make sure that we measure that and are transparent about the data, ready, and really make those decisions based on tracking that success.
You talked here on Straight Talk last time when you were running, not only about bridge building, but you thought it'd be a good idea to have a peace summit to bring all the parties involved, all the stakeholders together involving the protests, and have a peace summit. But then you tweeted not long ago, I think just several hours ago, that you thought a peace summit might be a good idea for the city council.
Yeah, I think it's really important for the city right now to have an aligned city council focused on houselessness, focused on economic recovery, and focused on building the country's best and most successful community safety system. And I want us to grapple with those issues, not get stuck in our silos of a bureau, but actually stay focused on those top 3 issues. The houselessness crisis is really out of control. As you know, it's sad. It's really, I want to talk about it more like a public emergency, health emergency. And it's time to compassionately relocate houseless residents off the public sidewalks, the parks, the bikeways, and provide humane shelter with organized camps with real services. It's time to be compassionate and caring, and also allow others to have access to our public right-of-ways. So it's important for us to really focus on that issue. And that connects to economic recovery. Our small businesses have been suffering. I have more empathy than ever after what happened last night. And we need to get currency flowing and clean up the mess, take down the boarded up windows, and open up. And sure, the flow will be different with COVID, but the holidays are coming up, and our city needs to once again bustle with activity and to get the currency flowing. And then that goes into the excitement that I have about really diving into radical reforms for not just the police, but throughout the city. It's time for us to be humble and look at how we can improve our culture throughout the city and really work closer with the county in this times of where efficiency is going to be really important.
Well, Commissioner, so many more things I'd like to talk to you about, but we're out of time. But thank you so much for joining us here on Straight Talk, and I wish you good luck in the days ahead.
Laural, it's always good to see you, and I'm so glad Pac-12 football is starting this weekend. So go Beavers, go Ducks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Up next, we bring back our election night panel to recap Decision 2020. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laural Porter. It was an exciting election night, and earlier I talked with our election night panel about their big takeaways from Decision 2020. We welcome back our KGW political analysts, Len Bergstein and Rebecca Tweed, one of the state's top political strategists. She ran Republican Newt Bueller's campaign for governor in 2018 and is a former director of the Oregon House Republicans. Rakaya Adams is out of town and couldn't join us today, but we thank her for being part of our election night panel. Rebecca and Len, it's great to have you back. Let's begin with your big takeaways from Decision 2020. And Len, as you reflect on this election, what stands out to you?
Well, 2020 was a year of chaotic life events with serious blows to our image as a state to solve big problems. Voters wanted change, but they lacked confidence in what they saw from our leaders to solve these big problems. So they voted a split decision. Statewide, Democrats won big prizes, Secretary of State, and maintained legislative majorities, but they really underperformed in a lot of ways. In Portland, Wheeler won re-election, but it was really a humbling victory. So what's left to talk about on this show is what challenges he's got to lead that council. We emerged from a year of devastating challenges in terms of the pandemic, wildfires, economic distress, and racial unrest, with a loss of swagger, I think, and no real leadership agenda. And that's what sticks out for me from this election.
And Rebecca, what's most notable to you?
I think this election reflects what we expected that it would from a political standpoint. You know, the state is a pretty partisan state. We saw votes down the ballot from Secretary of State to some of the measures that passed in the Portland metro region is still being very, very progressive. But you also saw Republicans come out in tens of thousands that had not turned out before to vote for leaders that were new to them, that brought a new energy, like in Congressional District 2 and like in Congressional District 4. And so I think what we saw that I'm really excited about actually is that in a year of turmoil, in a year where we're still having challenges trusting our leadership, we did see voters do what they do best and what Oregon is well known for. We got out, we voted, we got others to vote, and we really made our voices heard. Now, the challenges going forward have not changed for the two-party system that we really have in the state, that the divisiveness gets larger and larger. I think some of the legislative challenges that we see, will still be some of that divisiveness, and how do we tackle it down in Salem?
Well, the bright spot really was, too, the big turnout. Let's talk about what you mentioned, Len. City Council Ted Wheeler was reelected in a fierce race with challenger Sarah Iannarone, who was running to his left. He becomes the first mayor to be elected to a second term since Vera Katz served 3 terms. Also, newcomer Mingus Mapps defeated the incumbent Chloe Daly for City Council. So, Len, what do you think that says about the mood of the electorate and what it means for the city of Portland?
Well, Laurel, voters really were dissatisfied, according to all the polls, with the current direction the city is going. So it set the stage for a change election, for a change, and the incumbents became it was a referendum on incumbents. Mayor won the race for re-election, but it was a humbling victory, and he only was done with the help of an outside independent committee, this kind of Unity for Portland. So his challenge now is to find kind of a recipe for leadership on a totally new council. He's got a contentious and somewhat untested group of colleagues to kind of move forward with some big challenges to deal with in the city of Portland. Mingus Mapps has got a challenge to kind of find his role in the council. It's being a great city commissioner is not so easy. It's tougher than it looks. You've just defeated somebody and you think you're on top of the world, but then you get thrown in as one of a junior member of a group. And in the past, we've had some great folks like Charles Jordan and of course Nick Fish, Mike Lindbergh, Mildred Schwab, standout commissioners. But it's tough to do, and Mingus Mapps has got a challenge to find the right role on this council.
Rebecca, there were a lot of money measures on the ballot locally. Taxes for parks, the library, universal pre-K, schools, they all passed except the $5 billion Metro Bond 26-218. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, measures in general are a reaction from citizens to action not being taken by their leaders, whether that's local or at a legislative level. Oregonians right now are really focused on improving and solving the problems around quality of life. And I think what we've seen even from elected leaders is that we're looking for accountability and we're looking for solutions. And these measures really do that, with the exception of a tax measure for transportation that I think voters in the metro area said, hey, we're not afraid to pay taxes. We pass them all the time, but we need them to provide solutions for us. And the No campaign did a great job of saying this won't provide climate change the way you want. It won't improve transportation. And in fact, it's going to hurt our small businesses that are struggling, as opposed to the other measures where you could clearly see this is to help our schools. It's to help our families. Those are taxes people will get behind. And I think overall, having these measures is a reflection of what Len was saying, that people are not satisfied with the leadership they have. That's going to happen at the state level also. Measures come forward when people want action. Reflections for elected leaders across the state were the same this year. There is a change and a request for accountability. These measures are going to do that.
How big a defeat was this, Len, for the Metro?
It was a big one, and I think that Rebecca's kind of given us a good analysis of these races. Metro was on a roll before this vote. They were the go-to government to solve a bunch of problems, including urban spaces, homeless issue, and most recent ballot measure. And really, they had put together a 2-year plan for planning for transportation services. Then the pandemic hit, and they didn't adjust to the facts on the ground, and they still came forward with really a big ticket ballot measure with obvious outsized problems, some of which Rebecca talked about, so that in fact the voters saw those flaws and voted against it. The real question, I suppose, whether or not the Metro looks upon it as just a loss of a transportation initiative, or whether it was their own reputation that was on the ballot. I think voters, because it went down in Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County, all were saying something about Metro, and so they have to go back and kind of rebuild some of those relationships as well as their own reputation before they think about bringing another big transportation package. I think Len Peterson's going to go down to the Capitol and try and push the issue over to the state to fund some of these transportation corridors. But the real question is, how did Metro come out of this ballot?
Thank you,
how
Len.
wounded did they come out?
I want to get to the legislature here. Rebecca, Oregon Democrats currently have supermajorities in both the Senate and the House, and they were hoping to expand their majorities in this election. How are Oregon Republicans feeling about how things went for them in this election?
I would say that they should feel pretty good about it. I mean, a win for Oregon Republicans in the legislature in 2020 would have been status quo. The Republicans did pick up one seat as far as numbers are concerned, but they actually flipped two seats that have been held by Democrats for over 2 years, or over 10 years on the South and North Coast. That to me sends a significant message to the whole legislature that you have a new body of constituents that have not felt like they've been represented. They made a different decision. And even though those numbers don't change chamber powers or bicameral powers, they do change, I think, what the electorate or what the legislature needs to look at for what the electorate represents now in Salem. So I think Republicans know that there's work to be done. They know they will have their work cut out for them in the session, but they should be happy that status quo +1 was maintained and a number of seats are still waiting to be determined.
So the Democrats didn't get that walkout-proof majority. Len, do you want to comment on that?
Rebecca's done such a great job of putting lipstick on a pig here. This was, the Republicans wind up competing in a more narrower and narrower group of votes. If they look to the South Coast and the North Coast as their place where they're going to regain control, I think they're in a diminishing playing field. They're losing in Bend. They lost in Marion County, and they obviously have no real kind of grip in the metropolitan area. So it's clearly the Democrats underperformed. They didn't get everything they wanted, but this was I think the Republicans are going to really have to enlist Rebecca's optimism in order to think about what going forward.
Len, we just have about 45 seconds each for a final thought on Decision 2020. We'll start with you, Len.
Well, obviously, 2020 was a chaotic year, and the election didn't resolve it, didn't give us a sense of satisfaction. What I'm looking for, hopefully, is that some of the leaders who did get elected will, in fact, kind of come forward with an agenda for change. I mean, I think we really need to come out of this to kind of tackle some of our very, very big problems that came from the pandemic, come from the racial justice issues, the wildfires. I mean, there's a big agenda waiting for somebody to grab a hold of, and I think Oregonians want to maintain that swagger again that we had before 2020.
And Rebecca, a closing comment from you?
I feel like Oregonians are looking to hold our legislative and our local leaders accountable. It's been a really tough year. It's been chaotic, and it feels like our leadership at times has been playing catch up instead of being proactive. I think the turnout this year, I think the issues that have passed, I think the new folks that have been elected really are calling for accountability as we move forward. And, to Len's point, I am optimistic. I do think that the more engaged everybody is, the more accountable we're holding leaders and in elections, and as we move into a pretty intense and pretty full legislative session, the better Oregonians are going to come out of it. But I think we need to expect there will be some challenges and some pretty heated debates with one another across the state on how we do that. But I think it can be done.
Rebecca Tweed, Len Bergstein, thank you so much for joining us. And we thank you both for being such an important part of our election coverage this year. And thank you for watching and listening. Remember to download our podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next week for Straight Talk. Have a great week.